and welcome to Let's Meet the Virologist, a podcast about the people behind today's virology headlines, people working to understand viruses and how they affect you. We are talking with students, postdocs, and other virologists so that you can learn who they are and what they do. I am Larissa Thackeray, and I am hosting this podcast from America's Heartland in St. Louis, Missouri. On June 1st, 2022, we talked with Arman Azad, a medical student at Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. He received his bachelor's in neuroscience and behavior from Columbia University and worked as a journalist for CNN, covering health news in COVID-19. His research investigated the immune responses to COVID infection and vaccination in people with HIV. Thanks for talking with us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Arman Azad. I am a rising third-year medical student at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I am originally from Northern Virginia, but I moved to New York City for undergrad. So I've been here for, I guess, about 5 years now. Currently, I am in the middle of studying for my first board exam, step 1. So hopefully by the time this podcast is out, I have put that behind me and it hopefully will have gone well.
Great. And can you sort of tell us how you first became interested in science, maybe medicine, and then maybe virology?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't always know that I wanted to study something in science, study something in medicine. I've always been really interested in actually like politics and policy and media and sort of that kind of world. And, when I was in college, I also realized that I really liked fields where I would work with people and sort of, interact with a lot of people. And I spent some time volunteering in an emergency department and sort of having clinical experiences. And I realized that it's actually something I really enjoyed. And I also really liked science as sort of like a subject too. And so, I still wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but medicine seems like something, a path that I wanted to pursue. And I actually spent some time in college interning as sort of a health journalist with CNN. And so I kind of had this exposure to both media as well as science. And when COVID happened, it was actually my senior year of college. And I went back to working this time as a freelance journalist covering the pandemic. And so, suddenly everything was infectious diseases and everything was viruses. And so I kind of had this exposure to the field of infectious diseases. Previously, I'd be working on stories about medicine and working on stories about science, but, kind of across the whole spectrum. And essentially overnight, it was, World Health Organization press releases, speaking with doctors and researchers about the virus, incessantly checking the CDC website to see every new update, to see all the case numbers. And so I think that's how I really became interested in viruses, and I became interested in virology and infectious diseases. And then, as COVID progressed, I sort of was able to approach it from different angles other than just kind of the media side. I was volunteering at the hospital as part of the COVID response there. And then I, also started working in a lab at Mount Sinai, Dr. Viviana Simon's lab, which was studying COVID at the time. So, I went from not really even knowing if I wanted to do science or medicine to, feeling like kind of my whole world was viruses.
Wow, how interesting. And how did you sort of get to your specific medical school institution, your specific lab? Like, what were the things that kind of attracted you to those different places?
So I actually applied to Mount Sinai through what was called the FlexMed program. So it was actually a early admissions program where I applied my sophomore year of college. And I think that kind of offered me the flexibility to explore some other things when I was in college without the pressure of applying to medical school, sort of at the end of college. So I think that's kind of why I was able to do my internship in health journalism and sort of get involved in that world. And then when I began medical school at Mount Sinai, it was fall of 2020. So really in the midst of the pandemic. And we were actually online for our first semester, which was a very weird way to start medical school. You know, everybody was trying their best, but it's certainly not ideal. And when we eventually were in person, it was actually through my preceptor for one of our courses, Art and Science of Medicine. Her name was Dr. Beverly Forsyth, and she's a disease doctor at Mount Sinai. And I basically asked her, I was like, you know, I'm really interested in COVID. I'm really interested in, you know, that topic and researching that topic. And she connected me with Dr. Viviana Simon. And, you know, both of them were just so welcoming and so accepting and so eager to sort of provide opportunities. And so I began working in Dr. Simon's lab, and I spent the summer doing research in her lab. And so that's kind of how I stumbled into that position. But, you know, research was not something that I thought I really wanted to do with my life. I had worked in a lab in undergrad, but, you know, I didn't really see research as being something that I wanted my future to be. I think that over the past 2 years, I've had such amazing experiences with people who have put so much time and effort into teaching me things and into, you know, trying to see me succeed. And I think that, you know, when you're surrounded by really good people, it makes you really want to continue doing that work. So I was originally, you know, maybe only going to be in the lab for the summer as sort of a summer research project, but I have stayed there and I've continued working there. And it's been a great experience. I'm not there now as I'm studying for STEP, my exam. And, you know, I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to be able to continue working in the lab once I start my clinical rotations. But definitely having the experience of research and being able to be in that world is something that I'm really thankful for.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit about that research then? What exactly did you do over the summer and this past year?
Yeah, so my project in the summer and sort of continuing after that was looking at immune responses to SARS-CoV-2 infection and COVID-19 vaccination in people with HIV compared to people without HIV. So a little bit of background, the Simon Lab, you know, being in New York City has been involved with the pandemic response basically from the beginning, and has collaborated with a lot of different people across the institution, you know, collecting samples from patients, you know, from the very beginning. And one of the cohorts of participants that has been involved has been people with HIV. So, you know, we've had a really great collaboration with Dr. Luz Lugo, who works at the HIV clinic at Mount Sinai West, one of our hospitals, and you know, has been recruiting people with HIV into the study. And so there have been a lot of questions, you know, ever since the beginning of the pandemic about whether people with HIV are at increased risk of severe outcomes from COVID-19. And so this work has really been looking at the immune responses and seeing, you know, how do they compare in people with HIV to people without HIV. So, you know, the actual collection of those samples and recruitment of those participants predates me. So, you know, started long before I was in the lab, but I've been sort of continuing that project and analyzing the data, which has been a great opportunity.
Right.
And so that's what I'll be presenting at a poster at ASV. Okay. So basically some of the early findings from that. It is a longitudinal study. So we are continuing to collect samples from participants. And so, you know, I imagine that by the time ASV happens, we'll have even more data. But it's been a really good opportunity, and just really thankful for all of the participants who have been willing to give their time, give samples so that we can all learn more.
Right. And can you tell us, not so much, I don't want to steal your thunder for your poster, but can you tell us sort of some of the techniques that you were using to do that work? So how are you looking at these immune responses?
Yeah, so far, at least in terms of the research that we're presenting at ASV, it's been really looking at antibody responses. So sort of that side of the immune system. The Simon Lab has been working very closely with Dr. Florian Kramer's lab at Mount Sinai, to collaborate on the actual assay being used. Sort of the ELISA for quantifying those antibody responses. My project, we've been looking at spike binding antibodies and comparing in people with HIV and people without HIV, sort of those quantified antibody responses. Our cohort is generally people who are on antiretroviral medication. People who have access to care and who are receiving treatment. And so far, the data have been encouraging and suggest that, at least in terms of the antibody response in people who have HIV and are on medication, that it seems to be as robust of a response as people without HIV, which I think is really encouraging. Again, we are continuing to collect data. Right. But yeah, so that's what we've been looking at so far. I've also been working on a project, in collaboration with a lot of other people in the lab, looking at sort of optimizing an assay for T-cell responses. So kind of similar to the test for TB, the quantiferon test, the interferon gamma release assay. So that, but for SARS-CoV-2, which is still a work in progress. So don't have data on that for the population of people with HIV. But hopefully one day we'll also be able to have findings sort of on that side of the immune system response as well.
So I guess, it sounds like you're moving out of the lab. So what are your next steps? And now, after having done research, after having had some medical training during a pandemic, what are you thinking about doing for the future?
Yeah, so, I'm not exactly sure what I want to specialize in. Emergency medicine is something that I've been really interested in, especially during the pandemic. Infectious diseases is also something that I am really interested in. And, I feel like on the one hand, I have learned so much about infectious diseases for the past 2 years that I'm like, what is the farthest thing from that I can do? But on the other hand, I'm really passionate about this. And I know this is something that I want to continue studying. So I'm not exactly sure what I want to do. But I think that, having medical school during a pandemic has taught me a lot about the type of work I want to do. So one of the things I've been involved with, for example, has been the student volunteer response to COVID. So we've had a cohort of now hundreds of students who volunteer their time administering vaccines, helping run testing pods, a lot of different things within the health system to respond to the pandemic. I think that sort of emergency response and kind of putting things together and when working as a team is something that I know I want to be a part of whatever I do. So I'm keeping an open mind. Going to medical school during a pandemic, have not maybe had as many clinical experiences yet because we were online for a good period of time. But I'm keeping an open mind, and I think that whatever I do, having experience in research is something that not everybody, I think, does, who wants to go and be a clinician. But I think that it's just such valuable experience because it really is the foundation of, everything we know about medicine. And I hope that whatever career I do, I continue to have research involved in some way.
And what about your experience with sort of media and journalism? That's a little unusual for a clinician as well. So how has that sort of shaped how you think about medicine and science?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, a lot of the work that I was doing was taking research papers and studies and that type of thing, and sort of distilling it down in a way that can be communicated to the general public. And, that aspect of communication and, clearly saying things in a way that is accurate, but also not too scientific, is, I think, a really important skill that I was able to work on and that I think is going to be really important in clinical practice. I also think, the other side of it is not just how you communicate with the general public, but also the fact that it's just so important to have that sort of communication. And it's so important to not just do science in a lab and not just, do medicine in conferences and in patient rooms, but also be able to share those findings with the world. And I think that, this podcast, for example, is an example of kind of translating science from the lab to something that people can take with them on the go, learn about. And so, that's also something that I think I want to be a part of my career, maybe as a journalist, maybe somebody who's writing op-eds, or, maybe even on sort of the policy side. I just think it's so important, but it's also something that I really enjoy. And, I think that more people should sort of, be able to have time that they spend on projects like that, as opposed to just the science and medicine of it all. Because I think that it's obviously valuable to have the research, but it's less valuable if you're not also sharing that with the world in a way that people can understand.
Right. Do you think that has changed recently with sort of how people consume media or consume information? Do you think sort of not just the ability to interface with the public, but almost like the need to interface with the public, has that actually changed recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially during COVID, people are consuming so much information about science in ways that I don't think people did before. I mean, people are getting in kind of inside look into the great things about science, like the development of a vaccine, so quickly, all the things we've learned, but also, kind of the less glamorous side of science, which is that there's a lot we don't know, and that there's a lot of things that change pretty quickly. And, I think that as a consumer, even as somebody who is familiar with the world of science, you can get kind of a little bit of whiplash sometimes, like, oh, I thought we were supposed to do this. Now we're supposed to do this. We weren't supposed to wear masks. Now we're supposed to wear masks. And I think that for people who are, in the world of research, those types of messages are maybe not surprising because that's how science has always worked. But I think that for the general public, that's not really how we're used to things happening. If there's sort of like a dietary guideline recommendation, it comes out after 10 years of review and committees and everything, versus everything is changing on the fly now. And so I think that we've really gotten an inside look into the scientific process and how that works. And, the difficulty there is that it's not always that pretty. And so I think that on the one hand, people have so much more access to all this information, which is great. And hopefully, access continues to be open. Preprints and sort of changes in publishing, I think are really important and really great. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of work to do in terms of gaining trust and making sure that things are communicated accurately. And when caveats are needed, caveats are there. So definitely a lot of progress to be made, I think, on that front, but also a lot of opportunity for people to be a lot more involved in the research that affects them.
Right. Great. Well, thanks so much. We look forward to your poster at ASV, and good luck on your exam.
Thank you so much. I will report back. Hopefully I am in a good mood at ASV if it goes well.
This has been Let's Meet the Virologist, a podcast about people who study viruses. This is your host, Larissa Thackeray, and thanks for listening. You can find us on Google, Apple, Amazon Music, and other podcast providers, or at lmtv.podbean.com.